Breaking Bad didn't just kill its characters, it made you watch them earn their endings. Over 5 seasons, a movie, and 6 seasons of Better Call Saul, this franchise built one of the most complete ecosystems of consequence ever put on television. Every choice echoed, every debt came due. So let's walk through all 8 major characters and trace exactly where each of them ended up, starting with the one who started it all. Walter White. Walter White doesn't just die at the end of Breaking Bad. He orchestrates an entire farewell tour, and it might be the most productive last day anyone has ever had. After months hiding in a freezing New Hampshire cabin, watching his family disown him on national television, Walt does what Walt always does. He makes a plan. And this one has to cover every single loose end, which at this point is basically everyone he's ever met. First stop, Gretchen and Elliot Schwartz, his former business partners from Grey Matter, the company Walt helped build and walked away from, for reasons that still make him clench his jaw decades later. Walt breaks into their home, terrifies them, and lays out the deal. They're going to take his remaining $9 million in drug money and set up a trust for Walt Jr. on his 18th birthday, presenting it as their own generous donation. To ensure compliance, Walt points to 2 red laser dots dancing across their chests. They're actually Badger and Skinny Pete with laser pointers. Not exactly the A-team, but it works. Next, he visits Skyler one last time. He gives her the GPS coordinates to where Hank and Gomez are buried, a bargaining chip with prosecutors. But here's the moment that reframes the entire series. Skyler cuts him off before he can start the "I did it for the family" speech again, and Walt, for the first time in 5 seasons, drops the act. I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. And I was really alive. 5 years of justifications collapse into one honest sentence in a cramped kitchen. He built a meth empire because it made a dying chemistry teacher feel like he mattered. That's the whole show. But Walt's still working his checklist. He meets Lydia and Todd at a cafe, pitching a new cooking arrangement. Lydia orders her chamomile tea, dumps in her stevia, and starts calculating margins. What she doesn't know is Walt already swapped her stevia for ricin, the same ricin that's been floating around since season 2, Chekhov's gun, meet Chekhov's sweetener, then comes the big one. Walt rigs an M60 in his trunk, wired to a remote pivot mechanism, and drives to Jack Welker's compound where the neo-Nazis have been keeping Jesse Pinkman as a chained-up cook. Walt gets inside, gets Jack talking, tackles Jesse to the ground, and hits the trigger. The M60 tears through the walls and everyone standing behind them. A retired chemistry teacher building a remote-controlled death turret in a sedan. Borderline Pulp Fiction. But the show earns it because of everything surrounding it. One problem, though. Walt catches a stray bullet from his own machine, his own creation. The thing he built to destroy his enemies punches a hole through him on the way past. If that's not poetic irony, nothing is. After the smoke clears, Walt slides a gun to Jesse, offering him the chance to finish it. Jesse sees the wound, sees a dead man standing, and says, "Do it yourself." He drops the gun, climbs into a car, and tears through the compound gates screaming. Walt is left alone. He wanders into the meth lab. Jack's crew had been cooking his formula this whole time. Walt touches the steel tanks, runs his fingers along the tubing. Badfinger's baby blue kicks in. Guess I got what I deserved. He collapses on the lab floor, bleeding out, surrounded by the chemistry that gave him purpose and destroyed everything else. Walter White dies at 52 in the only place he ever truly felt at home. So did Walt win, on paper kind of. On paper, he eliminated every enemy, secured his children's financial future, gave Skyler leverage with prosecutors, and freed Jesse. Pretty solid final day for a man with a bullet wound. But zoom out. His son despises him. His brother-in-law is dead because of him. He dies alone on a concrete floor while cops close in. The victory is that his children might get money they'll never know came from manufacturing methamphetamine. That's not winning. That's damage control by a dying man who ran out of people to lie to, including himself. Walt's death isn't redemption. It's one final assertion of control by a man who could never let anyone else hold the wheel. He chose where to die, how to die, and who to take with him. The cancer was going to kill him anyway, all he did was pick the room, but Walt's story doesn't end without talking about the person he damaged most. The kid he dragged into the Empire. Destroyed, rebuilt, and destroyed. Again. Jesse Pinkman. Most people remember Jesse's escape from the compound as this pure moment of victory. He's screaming behind the wheel, flooring it through the gates, and it feels like liberation. But here's the thing. It wasn't. By the time Walt shows up with his trunk-mounted M60, Jesse has already been destroyed. He's been living in a literal cage underground, chained like an animal, forced to cook at gunpoint. The leverage they used? Brock. A child. They told Jesse that if he tried anything, Brock would pay for it, and to prove they weren't bluffing, they executed Andrea right in front of him, which is, not ideal. So when Walt's machine gun tears through Jack's crew, Jesse is on the floor. Alive only because his chain kept him low enough to dodge the spray, Walt slides him a gun. And Jesse refuses to use it. He tells Walt that if he wants to die, he can do it himself. Jesse is done being someone else's instrument. The one thing he does allow himself is strangling Todd with those same chains, and honestly, nobody on Earth was losing sleep over that one. Then he drives away screaming, and for a lot of people, that was the ending. Jesse Pinkman, free at last, except El Camino exists. It picks up at the exact second he clears those gates, and what it shows is a man who is anything but free. Jesse flinches at noises. He flashes back to the compound constantly. The PTSD is severe and it's everywhere. He's not celebrating his escape, he's barely surviving it. The film follows Jesse scrambling to get enough cash to pay Ed the Disappearer for a new identity. That means tracking down money Todd stashed, which leads him into a confrontation with Neil and Casey, two welders who literally helped build his cage. So that's fun. The climax comes in a welding shop where Jesse challenges Neil to a quick draw duel. Neil agrees, probably because he thinks he's the faster draw. He is not. Jesse anticipates Neil reaching for a hidden second gun and kills him first with a concealed weapon of his own. That duel matters more than people give it credit for. For the entire series, things happened to Jesse. Walt manipulated him, Gus used him, Jack's crew enslaved him. Every major turning point was someone else pulling the strings. But in that welding shop, Jesse reads the situation, predicts the betrayal, and acts first. There's no ego trip, no say my name moment. It's survival, plain and simple. Unlike Walt, Jesse's competence comes without a victory lap. With the money secured, Jesse pays Ed and gets shipped to Alaska under a new name. His one final gesture is a letter entrusted to Ed for Brock. We never see what it says. We don't need to. The film ends with Jesse driving through a snowy Alaskan landscape, and the image is deliberately open. It's not a happy ending. It's a beginning. And the whole point is that we don't know what comes next. What El Camino undeniably does is transform Jesse's story from a liberation fantasy into something more honest. Alaska isn't a reward. It's a fresh start purchased with blood and psychological damage, and whether Jesse can actually build something, there is a question the film is smart enough not to answer. But if Jesse's fate is defined by what was done to him and how he clawed his way out, Skyler White's fate is defined by something arguably worse, being trapped in plain sight the entire time. Skyler White. Skyler White might be the most misunderstood character in television history, and I don't mean misunderstood by the other characters in the show, I mean misunderstood by the people watching it. Here's the thing, Skyler's arc is quietly devastating because she goes from a completely unaware suburban spouse to an active participant in Walt's empire. She launders money through the A1A car wash. She orchestrates a fake gambling addiction cover story. She lies to her family, lies to the IRS, and becomes genuinely good at the criminal side of things. Which is, not ideal, but by the finale, Skyler isn't counting drug money in some villa. She's in a cramped apartment with Holly, assets frozen, staring down potential criminal charges. The woman who helped build a car wash empire as a front for meth money can barely afford rent. Cool. Add that to the list. Walt's final visit is arguably the most important scene in the entire show. He gives her the GPS coordinates of Hank and Gomez's burial site, a bargaining chip to negotiate with prosecutors. It works as leverage because Skyler never had direct involvement in any violent crimes. She never pulled a trigger or ordered a hit. She laundered money and told lies, which is bad. But it's a different category of bad when you're also the mother of 2 minor children. But the coordinates aren't the real gift. The real gift is the truth. When Walt finally admits he didn't do it for the family, that he did it because he liked it, because he was good at it, he releases Skyler from years of gaslighting. That confession doesn't bring Hank back. It doesn't unfreeze her accounts, but it gives her something she hasn't had in years. Clarity. She finally knows none of this was her fault in the way Walt always implied it was. What makes Skyler's fate so effective is what the show refuses to do with it. It refuses to punish her with death. It refuses to reward her with freedom. She's alive but diminished, not destroyed, not saved, just surviving. Jane died. Andrea died. Both became collateral damage. Skyler is one of the few women who actually makes it out the other side, even if the other side looks like a studio apartment and a court date. Now, the meta story is almost as dramatic as her actual fate. During the show's original run, the fan backlash was genuinely unhinged, death threats to the actress, organized hate campaigns. Anna Gunn wrote a New York Times op-ed describing Skyler as a kind of Rorschach test for society, and she was right. People rooted for a man who poisoned a child and murdered his brother-in-law by proxy, then called his wife the villain because she was upset about it. I don't know what to tell you. The good news is that later viewers, especially binge watchers who experience the full arc without week-long gaps, tend to express far more sympathy. They see what was always there. A woman trapped in an impossible situation, making real criminal choices, but also serving as an underappreciated moral compass in a show full of people who had completely lost theirs. Her ending reflects all of that complexity. No clean resolution, no dramatic death, just a woman in a small apartment holding coordinates that might keep her out of prison, finally understanding that the man who ruined her life did it because he wanted to. But if Skylar's fate is defined by what she survived, the next one is defined by what he didn't. Hank Schrader. Hank Schrader spent 5 seasons being the guy everybody underestimated, including Walter White, and that mistake cost both of them everything. Here's the thing about Hank. When we first meet him, he's loud, brash, waves his gun around at family barbecues like it's a party trick, easy to write off as the meathead brother-in-law. But somewhere between getting ambushed by the cartel, nearly dying, relearning how to walk, and battling panic attacks he refused to talk about, Hank quietly became the most principled character on the show. The discovery itself is almost insulting in its simplicity. A copy of Leaves of Grass sitting on a toilet tank, inscribed by Gail Boudichere to my other favorite WW, that's the thread that unravels everything. Hank sits there, mid-bathroom break, and the puzzle he's been agonizing over for years just clicks. His brother-in-law, the chemistry teacher, that's Heisenberg. What follows is one of the most tense stretches in television history. Hank doesn't go to the DEA, he doesn't call for backup. He builds the evidence himself, plays cat and mouse with Walt directly, and eventually corners him at Tohaji Lee. He slaps the cuffs on. He makes the arrest. For one brief, beautiful moment, Hank wins. Then Jack Welker's crew rolls up with enough firepower to supply a small militia, and everything falls apart in about 90 seconds. Gomez goes down, Hank takes a bullet to the leg, and Walt, the man who called these animals in the first place, suddenly realizes he can't put the pin back in the grenade. He begs, offers Jack $80 million. Every cent. Just let Hank live. But Hank already knows how this ends. He looks at Walt and delivers one of the most devastating lines in the entire series. You're the smartest guy I ever met, and you're too stupid to see. He made up his mind 10 minutes ago, one bullet, done. He doesn't beg, he doesn't bargain. He spends his final breath telling Walter White the truth that all his genius means nothing when he can't control the monsters he unleashed. Hank dies as a DEA agent who caught his man, not brother-in-law, not victim, lawman. The episode is called Ozymandias, named after the Shelley poem about a king whose empire crumbled to dust. It holds a perfect 10 out of 10 on IMDb, and it earned every decimal point. Hank's death is the poem. He's not the fallen king. Walt is. Hank is just the cost of that king's arrogance, buried in the same desert where the empire was built. Right before heading to Tohajili, Hank calls Marie, tells her he loves her. There's this weight in his voice, this quiet awareness that he might not come back, but he doesn't say that. He just says the things you say when you want someone to remember you said them. It's the moment Hank stops being a character and becomes a person you're about to lose. His body gets buried in the desert, unmarked, no funeral. Those coordinates become Walt's final bargaining chip, handed to Skylar so she can trade them for leniency. Even in death, Hank is still being used as currency in someone else's negotiation, which is, not ideal. The debate around whether Hank deserved to die misses the point entirely. The neo-Nazis didn't kill him because he was flawed. They killed him because he was right. And in the world of Breaking Bad, being right doesn't protect you from a thing. But as devastating as Hank's death is, the person who has to live with it might have it even worse. Marie Schrader. Marie Schrader never cooked meth, never laundered money, never pulled a trigger. And yet, by the end of this franchise, she might be the character who lost the most. For most of Breaking Bad, Marie exists in a space that's easy to overlook. She's the sister-in-law with the kleptomania problem, the one who wears purple everything, the one who bickers with Hank about minerals versus rocks. She's comic relief, basically, a quirky side character designed to lighten the mood between scenes of Walter White dissolving bodies in bathtubs. But here's where it gets complicated, because the show slowly, almost invisibly, strips all of that away. When Hank is murdered in the desert by Jack Welker's crew, Marie's entire world collapses. She shows up at the White residence alongside police, confronting Skylar, demanding she finally tell Walt Jr. the truth. Not just about the meth, about Hank, about what Walt's choices cost their family. The purple is gone. The quirks are gone. What's left is a woman who had everything ripped away by someone else's ambition, and she didn't even get a say in it. That alone would reframe her entire character. But then, Better Call Saul does something nobody expected. In the series finale Saul Gone, Marie reappears in a courtroom. Jimmy McGill is facing federal prosecution, and the court allows victim impact statements. Marie speaks on behalf of Hank and Steve Gomez. She's composed, she's articulate, and she is absolutely devastating. She refuses to let Hank's death become a footnote in someone else's plea deal. That's the thing about Marie that people miss. The story ended for viewers when the credits rolled. For her, it never ended. She's still carrying the weight of Ozymandias years later, still showing up to courtrooms, still saying his name. The franchise moved on to Jimmy McGill's arc, to Kim Wexler's guilt, to questions about redemption. Marie is there to remind everyone that while all that philosophical hand-wringing is happening, a woman lost her husband because a high school chemistry teacher wanted to feel powerful. Her transformation from comic relief to a figure of genuine tragedy is one of the most underappreciated arcs in the entire franchise. You don't even notice it happening until you rewatch the whole thing and realize every silly purple scene was building towards something genuinely heartbreaking. Her significance only becomes fully apparent when you view the franchise as a complete story rather than individual shows. Marie Schrader survives. She endures. And she makes sure nobody forgets the cost. But if Marie represents the human collateral of Walt's empire, the man who helped build that empire's legal infrastructure paid a very different price. One he chose for himself: Saul Goodman. Here's the thing about Saul Goodman: every single character in this franchise either dies, escapes, or gets left in limbo. Jimmy McGill is the only one who chooses his own cage. After Breaking Bad, Saul vanishes. Ed the Disappearer sets him up as Gene Takovich in Omaha, Nebraska, where he manages a Cinnabon inside a shopping mall. The loudest, most flamboyant criminal lawyer in Albuquerque is now wearing a brown polo shirt and frosting cinnamon rolls for people who don't look at his face. It's the most aggressively beige existence imaginable, and it's killing him slowly. Because Jimmy McGill cannot help himself. The quiet life lasts for a while, but eventually the old instincts kick in. Small scams become bigger scams attract attention, and before long he's targeting wealthy marks with increasingly reckless confidence. Which is, not ideal when you're a federally wanted fugitive whose face was once plastered on bus benches across New Mexico. He gets caught. Money laundering, conspiracy, aiding and abetting. Violent crimes connected to Walter White's entire meth empire. The kind of charges that add up to spending the rest of your natural life staring at concrete walls. But even facing all of that, Jimmy is still Jimmy. He talks, he negotiates, he leverages everything he knows about the operation and gets the feds down to a 7-year deal in a cushy minimum security facility. 7 years. For helping run one of the largest meth operations in American history. The man could talk a fish out of water and then sell it swimming lessons. And then he doesn't take it. In the courtroom, Marie Schrader delivers a victim impact statement about Hank, about what was taken from her. Jimmy has to sit there and listen to the actual human cost of every deal he brokered, every crime he facilitated, every time he looked the other way because the money was good. Then he sees Kim, sitting in that courtroom, watching him. The one person who ever knew all three versions of him, Jimmy, Saul, and Gene. The one person he could never fully con, and something breaks. Jimmy stands up and throws the plea deal in the garbage. He delivers a full, unplanned confession, not the carefully calibrated partial cooperation he'd negotiated, a real one. His role in Walt's empire, the money, the crimes. And then he goes further and admits his complicity in the events that led to his brother, Chuck's, suicide. The one thing he'd been running from longer than any federal charge, 86 years in federal prison. Jesse Pinkman, who literally cooked methamphetamine, walks free in Alaska. Jimmy McGill, who never once pulled a trigger, gets 86 years. The show is smart enough to let you sit with that rather than answer it for you. The law doesn't always punish the most dangerous person. It punishes the one it can catch who won't stop talking. But here's the part that stays with you. Jimmy adapts to prison. Of course he does. The inmates recognize him as Saul Goodman, and suddenly he's got status. He's giving legal advice in the yard. He's somebody again, even behind bars. And then Kim visits. They share a cigarette just like the old days. Two people who met in a mailroom and ended up here. The camera holds on Jimmy as Kim walks away through the chain link fence. He can't follow. He'll never follow. But for the first time in his entire life, Jimmy McGill isn't pretending to be someone else. He's just a guy in a jumpsuit who finally told the truth, and it cost him everything except the one thing he never had before. Honesty. Turns out that's the one con he could never pull off until he stopped trying. But if you think Jimmy's fate is heavy, wait until you hear about the man who warned everyone this would happen and then got killed for it anyway. Mike Ehrmantraut. Mike Ehrmantraut is the most competent person in the entire Breaking Bad universe, and that's exactly what makes his death so infuriating. Here's a guy who spent decades navigating the criminal underworld without a scratch, former Philadelphia cop, Marine Corps veteran, Gus Fring's right hand for years. He handled security, surveillance, enforcement, all of it with the kind of professional detachment that made everyone around him look like amateurs. Mike didn't panic, Mike didn't improvise. Mike had a plan, and the plan worked. Every single time. And then Walter White shot him over a bruised ego. After Gus's death, Mike reluctantly partnered with Walt. Reluctantly being the key word because Mike saw exactly what Walt was from day one, a ticking time bomb wrapped in a chemistry degree. But the money was there. And Mike had a granddaughter named Kaylee whose financial future he'd staked his entire moral compromise on, so he stayed. The breaking point comes in Say My Name. Walt demands the names of 9 incarcerated associates who could flip on their operation. Mike refuses and then unloads on Walt, tells him he's the one who ruined everything, that Gus had a good thing going and Walt's ego destroyed it, that every problem they're dealing with exists because Walter White couldn't just cook and collect his money like a normal person, which is completely accurate. Walt grabs Mike's own gun from the go bag and shoots him through the car window, not because Mike was a threat, not because there was any strategic reason. He did it because Mike hurt his feelings. And here's the kicker. Walt immediately realizes he could have gotten the names from Lydia. He literally says it out loud. Cool. Great timing on that realization, Walter. Mike stumbles down to a riverbank and collapses on a log by the water. Walt follows, stammering out an apology like that's going to fix the bullet hole. And Mike uses his final breath to deliver the most Mike Ehrmantraut line in television history. Shut the hell up and let me die in peace. Then he just sits there, watching the water, and dies. No explosion, no dramatic monologue, just silence and a river. Compare that to Gus walking out of a room with half his face missing, and you realize how much range this show has when it comes to killing people. Better Call Saul fills in the rest. His son Matty was killed because Mike convinced him to take dirty money as a cop in Philadelphia. That guilt drove everything. Every dollar Mike earned in the criminal world was for Kaylee and her mother. He compromised every principle he had for that one goal. And then, he died on a riverbank because a man-child couldn't handle being told the truth. The community overwhelmingly considers this one of Walt's most unforgivable acts. Hank's death is devastating, but there's at least a strategic logic to it. Mike's death has zero logic, it's pure wounded pride. The most disciplined operator in the entire franchise, a guy who survived cartel hits and DEA investigations, taken out by one impulsive gunshot from a partner he never should have trusted. And the worst part? All that money he set aside for Kaylee, all those years of moral compromise, potentially gone. The government cracked down on every asset connected to the operation. Mike sacrificed his ethics, his safety, and ultimately, his life for family security. And there's a very real chance none of it reached the people it was meant for. But if you think Mike's death is where the franchise peaks in terms of tragic irony, wait until you hear about the man he worked for, and the very personal vendetta that brought him down. Gus Fring. Gustavo Fring is the perfect character to end on, because his fate contains the single most iconic image in the entire franchise, and the single biggest mystery that nobody will ever solve. On the surface, you know exactly who Gus is. He runs Los Pollos Hermanos. He's polite, he's meticulous, and he also happens to be one of the most ruthless meth distributors in the American Southwest, operating an empire so clean that the DEA literally eats at his restaurant. For 3 seasons, he is the wall that Walter White cannot get past. Smarter, calmer, more disciplined, and backed by infrastructure Walt could only dream of. But here's the thing about Gus Fring. He has exactly one weakness, and Walt finds it. Gus's vendetta against the Salamanca family isn't business, it's personal. Decades earlier, Don Eladio killed his partner Max right in front of him, and Gus never forgot it. He spent years methodically dismantling the Salamanca operation, not just to consolidate power, but to make them suffer. The final piece is Hector Salamanca, the paralyzed old man in the nursing home who can only communicate by ringing a bell. Gus visits Hector specifically to taunt him, to stand over the last remnant of the family that took everything from him. That need to personally assert dominance is what kills him. Walt convinces Hector to cooperate in a suicide bombing. They rig a pipe bomb to his wheelchair, wired to detonate when Hector rings his bell. And when Gus walks into that room for what he thinks is another round of psychological torture, Hector starts ringing. Over and over. Gus realizes what's happening about half a second too late. Then comes the shot. Gus walks out of the room, straightens his tie. For one impossible moment, he looks completely fine, composed. And then the camera pans to reveal that the entire left side of his face is gone. He stands there for a beat, a dead man who hasn't fallen yet, and then he drops. 2 enemies who despised each other for decades, destroying each other in a single moment of mutual annihilation. And Walt, the guy who orchestrated the whole thing, just walks away and says 2 words. I won. But Gus's death, as iconic as it is, isn't actually the most interesting thing about him. His past is. Official records say he came to the United States from Chile in 1986, that's it. When Don Eladio kills Max and decides to spare Gus, he says something very specific. The only reason you are alive and he is not is because I know who you are. That line implies Gus held serious power back home, the kind of power that makes a cartel boss think twice about pulling the trigger, and then the show just never tells you what that power was. Fan theories range from Chilean military to intelligence operative to someone connected to the Pinochet regime. The timeline fits, the secrecy fits. But here's what makes it brilliant. Neither Breaking Bad nor Better Call Saul ever confirms any of it. Better Call Saul had 6 seasons to send the camera back to Chile. It never does. Not once. The writers understood something most shows don't. What you don't know about Gus Fring is more powerful than anything they could ever show you. His death gives you total revelation. Half a face, exposed bone, the complete destruction of the mask he wore every single day. And his past gives you total mystery. A black hole where a backstory should be. That's exactly why people are still talking about him years later. Some characters are defined by their endings. Gus Fring is defined by the question nobody will ever answer. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.